Throughout this My Club presentation, I'm going to be discussing three key topic areas within football. This includes racism, women in football, and hooliganism. I am then going to be linking these key issues with Chelsea Football Club and discussing how they have navigated these key areas throughout their history. So, in terms of a brief history, Chelsea were founded in 1905 by English businessman Gus Mears, who bought an athletic stadium in the hope of turning it into a football ground. This was later known as Stamford Bridge. Chelsea initially struggled to make a significant impact in English football. However, the club quickly gained a reputation for attracting large crowds. In the 1954-55 season, Chelsea's first major achievement came when they won the First Division title. Prior to this, the club had been a solid but unspectacular side. Following staggered successes in the coming years, including an FA Cup and a UEFA Winners' Cup, Chelsea were then marked by periods of instability in the 1970s, with frequent changes in ownership and managerial staff. The 1980s and 90s were then about building foundations to further progress from. Even through this transformation period, they were able to accumulate both domestic and European successes. Then, in 2003, the most transformative period in Chelsea's history began when Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich purchased the club. This marked the beginning of an era characterized by vast financial investment, including the signing of top players and managers. Throughout Abramovich's reign, the club won 21 trophies. Currently, Chelsea is under the ownership of a consortium led by Todd Boehly, an American businessman. Whilst having no notable achievements currently, Boehly's aim is focused on the long-term investments and growth of the club. The issues I'm going to discuss is racism, which can be defined as a form of prejudice that involves negative emotional reactions to members of a group within society due to their racial identity. Racism is a pressing issue within our current society. It is present in all walks of life and is an issue that, despite being rife across the globe, is one that many are attempting to ameliorate through campaigns such as Black Lives Matter and Together Against Racism. With racism being a pressing societal issue, it is inevitable that it would come into the world of football, especially with the large number of ethnic minorities that the sport attracts. Campaigns like Kick It Out showcase the presence of racial discrimination in football. They have stated that racial discrimination accounts for just under half of all discriminatory reports within professional and grassroots football. Chelsea themselves have continuously been involved in racial issues throughout their history. In both the 1980s and 1990s, Chelsea were associated with the National Front, a far-right group who were coined as undeniably racist. Also in this period was the racist culture within the youth development team. In 2018, multiple former youth players accused Graham Rix and Gwyn Williams of engaging in racist behaviour while working with the Chelsea's Youth Academy in the 1990s. Allegations included frequent use of racial slurs directed at black players and also derogatory remarks about players' backgrounds and families. Not only have the fans and coaching staff been associated with racial issues, but also the players. John Terry was infamously involved in a discriminatory issue with QPR player Anton Ferdinand, in which Terry was accused of individualistic racism in 2012. It resulted in Terry receiving a 4-match ban along with a £220,000 fine. The fact that one of the most prominent players in Chelsea's history and a so-called leader and role model has been accused of racial discrimination highlights the possible embedded culture of racism within the club. In current times, racism is predominantly given through social media. Tammy Abraham infamously received heavy racism in 2019, but he is just one of many players within the club that have been targeted on social media because of their race. Despite racism evidently being present at Chelsea, the club have taken measures in order to decrease the amount of racism fans are expressing. For example, Chelsea launched the Say No to Anti-Semitism campaign in 2018, addressing anti-Semitism in football and society. This campaign was personally backed by Roman Abramovich, the club's owner at the time. Chelsea also outwardly condemn any form of racism as a club and take a strict approach to disciplining fans found guilty of racist behaviour, often issuing a lifetime ban. Chelsea Football Club are just one small example of racism within football and society. It is an issue that has been continuously institutionalised, internalised and individualised. But with the fruition of campaigns that seek to bridge the equality gap between BAME individuals and others, it is an issue that can be ameliorated within the coming years. The next topic of discussion surrounds women's football and how Chelsea possess one of the most successful women's teams in the world. It is common knowledge that women face challenges within today's society, whether that be through a lesser income or underrepresentation within certain industries. Unfortunately, this societal issue is reflected within the women's game. The most noticeable event in women's football history is the ban that the FA put on the women's game in the 1920s, which prohibited professional women's matches. This ban lasted for nearly 50 years. But still today, women's football is highly overlooked. For example, women's football coaches systematically earn less than male coaches. There is a huge difference in the commercialisation and professionalisation of women's football compared to men's football, and also officials earn less money refereeing women's football compared to men's. Despite this evident disparity between men and women's football, huge progressions are being made within the women's game, and Chelsea are a prime example of that. In 1992, Chelsea Ladies FC were formed and placed in a local league where they would compete against teams in the surrounding areas. However, financial instability suffocated the team in their first few years, showcased by the players having to sell lottery tickets at Stamford Bridge on men's match days in order to raise funds for the side. By the 2000s, however, they had reached an FA Cup final and won the County Cup. Because of these early successes, they were then put into the national leagues, where they were soon about to achieve unprecedented successes. In the 1999-2000 season, the team retained the County Cup, won their League Cup, and also won the league title, earning them a promotion. This then gained traction from the main Chelsea club, which meant that the ladies' team were then provided with an extra funding and a physio. The following years were a struggle for the team, as they lost many players to rival clubs who would turn fully professional, like England goalkeeper Siobhan Chamberlain, who moved to fully professional team Fulham. However, in 2004, Chelsea Ladies FC became officially affiliated with Chelsea FC, providing them with the much needed infrastructure and support to grow. In the following year, in 2005, Chelsea Ladies were promoted to the FA Women's Premier League, then the top tier of English women's football, but failed to make any improvements in the coming years and were in an established mediocre top tier side. After turning professional in 2010, Chelsea became founders of the new Women's Super League in March 2011. This was then seen as a new era for women's football. Since then, manager Emma Hayes was in charge for 12 years and won a staggering 14 trophies with the women's team. The progression of Chelsea women's teams from 1992 to current day is a key example of professionalism and success in women's football. Their rise reflects the growing stature of the women's game globally, and they continue to inspire the next generation of women's players and fans. Over the last 10 years, the FA have projected a strategy for the WSL, which considers the growth of teams, expansion of leagues, innovative marketing approaches, and the commercialisation of the league. This suggests that the women's game is only going to increase in popularity and participation within the coming years. The final topic of discussion is hooliganism, which refers to fan identity and relations being shaped, expressed, and contested through forms of violence. Hooliganism in football can be traced back as far as the early 20th century, but the structured and organised nature of violence was not introduced until the 1960s, where there was the fruition of firms. Since then, hooliganism is an issue many have been trying to combat globally, as nearly all countries within football experience it. Whilst across countries in Europe like Italy and Poland, violence between ultras is a cause for concern, strict laws and stadium reforms have drastically reduced incidents within the UK. Traditional conceptions of masculinity associated with football morphed into something consistent, while today's cultural climate within the UK. Meanwhile, much of continental European football remained unchanged, leaving a football culture that resembled England's of the 1970s and 80s. Despite this, many notorious firms still exist in the UK to this day, including the infamous Chelsea headhunters. Emerging in the 1960s and 70s, during the peak of football hooliganism in England, the headhunters were known for their violent confrontations with rival firms, especially those of London clubs like Millwall's Bushwhackers.
The headhunters quickly gained a negative reputation by associating themselves with white supremacist groups like Combat 18 and the Ku Klux Klan. One of the more prominent events within the firm's history was the actions of Kevin Whitten, a high-profile member of the firm who was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1985 for violent assault in an attack on a pub. From the firm's formation up until present day, they have continuously been involved in violence and racism, more recently taking part in Islamophobic protests outside of a mosque. However, reasons and the motive behind the headhunters' actions aren't fully known. Research suggests that the continuous hooliganism can be attributed to many factors, for example, alcohol or sense of belonging. But the one I'm going to hone in on is the role of English media. A seminal study on the topic in 1978 by Stuart Hall found that the media generate and keep alive societal reactions to hooliganism phenomena. More recent research by the likes of Emma Poulton further cement of the role of English media have in keeping hooliganism apparent within England. Whilst hooliganism has been on a downward trajectory in England over the last few decades, it still remains an issue, highlighted by the 2,264 hooligan-related arrests in the 2022-23 season, of which was a 10-year high. Has looked at the key issues of racism, women inferiority and hooliganism within the world of football by using Chelsea as a key example. The general idea is that these issues, despite still being heavily prevalent in today's society, are issues that are constantly being combated by many people who advocate for the causes, in hope that these three issues deteriorate in the coming years so that football is a sport that all can participate in and spectate in equally.